You gentlemen ready to get started? We could
Let's do
probably
it.
get rolling. Awesome. Hey, everyone. Thanks so much for joining. Quick note. We love interaction. So if there's anything we're talking about today that you have questions on and they relate to you or your business, obviously, don't dox yourself or whatever. We would love to hear it. We'd love to have conversations all centered around it. You can either do that through the Q&A or you can just ask it in the chat and we'll try to make sure to keep up with it because sometimes we do get a ton of questions. So today we're talking about how should MSPs manage cybersecurity? And I want to draw attention to one word, how. It's not should they, it's not, it's how should they do this? The expectation is foisted upon all of you who have joined this call. So this is now a conversation of you're expected to do this in some capacity. Does that mean you transfer it all to somebody else? Or does that mean you in-house it and do it yourself? Does it mean something in between? I'm willing to bet these gentlemen here will have some interesting, sometimes conflicting, but mostly agreeing opinions on that. To get started, Wes, do you want to introduce yourself for those who may not know who you are?
Yeah, for sure. So, hey everyone, Wes Spencer here. I am a security nerd, have been my whole career, and was in spent a number of years in banking. I was a CIO at a bank, and from there, me and a few friends went and started a company called Perch Security. Perch was a cybersecurity threat detection platform, and let me tell you, learning how to sell like a SIM is what it's actually called. Learning to sell a SIM down market to SMBs through MSPs back in 2018 was really, really difficult. We had to learn how to do that by educating and teaching people why security matters. And so I kind of went down this journey of being an educator, and I didn't realize that. And I've always been an educator at heart. So if you follow me on LinkedIn, you follow me in these places, you'll see this. I'm always teaching, learning. I'm learning myself, but I love to teach. I love to just help others in their journey in security, and went and started a company to that end with two others, Kyle Christensen and Alex Farling, called Empath. And it's literally a training platform for MSPs that helps them get better and gives MSP owners the measurabilities and capability to really help them grow in that journey. Because at the end of the day, MSPs do not hire from CrowdStrike and Huntress. They hire from the AT&T store, and they have to figure out, how do we get that person that has no security experience up to speed? How do we get them to understand what matters and how to discuss this with a client who's got their arms crossed saying, well, I don't care about security. No one's coming after me. I've never been hit before. I'm not going to get hit now, buddy. I'm not going to do this. How do we get them to care? That's a complex, monumental challenge. But if we do solve it, guess what? We do something amazing. We exploit the system. Now, no longer am I hiring 150, 180K super highly secure people, which, let's be honest, none of us hire those people. They'll all go work at banks. We can hire from anywhere. I can pick up any person off the street from making 45K a year, pay them 50, give them a pathway to grow and learn, and get them going in lockstep with our MSP. And I can do this over and over and over and over again. And so that's what I'm passionate about. And I know this topic is right at the heart and center of this. So thanks for bringing me on.
Anytime. Thanks for being here. Reg, why don't you introduce yourself as well?
Yeah, howdy everyone. Thanks for being here. I started my career early. Got into startups back in, well, I won't even share the year. But as it relates to this conversation, probably the most meaningful was one of the co-founders of Autotask back in the early 2000s. Spent about a decade there. It was fortunate enough to watch the birth of managed services. Was an interesting hurdle and journey and reward all at the same time. Spent the next 15 years or so in enterprise cybersecurity, started a company called Grey Castle Security that became one of the largest, fastest growing professional services firms in the space. We kind of saw that technology was only solving part of the problem, and there were lots of hammers and no carpenters. So our mission was to change that. And then most recently started Orbital Fire about 4 years ago now. And so if you haven't heard, what our mission is to really partner with MSPs and provide an alternate option for, certainly alternate to what the industry would have you believe is your only path to opportunity and success in cybersecurity. And I won't go into a pitch there, but we're doing some things differently here. But we focus on working with MSPs to deliver cybersecurity in a different model, completely different model. And we are already getting close to 9,000 seats in 3 years.
That's awesome. To everyone listening, I work with several hundred MSPs, and I talked to several thousand last year. And the subject of how I should manage cybersecurity for my clients is the single greatest, I want to say, cause for concern. It gives them the most anxiety, heartburn, whatever. Sometimes I see them popping tums on the calls that I'm with. And I have been friends with Reg here and Wes here for, I want to say, almost several years now. I can't even remember. And this is a subject that I talk about with them privately, publicly, such as this. We talked about it last month. We talked about it in person when we see each other at events. So it's something I don't want to say we have all the right beliefs on, but I forget who said this, but my opinion trumps yours. So bring facts to this conversation. I guess that's maybe how we approach it. Is it's been thought through somewhat. So the first question that I have and feel free to take this in whichever order you would like, is why does everyone have such strong opinions on how MSPs manage cybersecurity? And before you start answering that, the answer can't be because, of course, somebody needs to manage cybersecurity. I think that's like a given. It's why is there such strong opinions on how MSPs should do this? Why is it not clear to everyone why they should be operating in the exact same way?
Can I just say the hottest of hot takes?
Sure.
Because the vendors want you to do it their way so they make more money. Let me expound on that just a little bit. At the end of the day, there's a right way to do security, but there's a lot of ways to do that right. A right way is following a security framework, adhering to it, understanding when you follow, like okay, take software inventory, like Control 2 from CIS. I don't even know if anyone here knows CIS controls. There's a lot of ways to go about building a software inventory. The key is that you did it, right? And what you'll find a lot of times is that vendors will really want to say, don't worry about this and this and this and this. You should just be doing this and this and this. And by the way, we have the tools to do that. And if you follow our way of doing it, not only does it lock you in, you're actually not learning the why you're doing this thing. You're just doing it. An analogy to this is, how many times have you watched like a YouTube video where there's like a tutorial and they're showing you how to do something, maybe like website design or like Photoshop or something. And like, click here and do this, click here and do that, click here and do this. I'm like, okay, I understand how I got the output of that, but I don't understand why that worked. No one's teaching me the why to do this. And if I step even at the smallest amount outside of that gate that you just taught me, I'm worthless. And I think that's dangerous in security. And a lot of times the vendors will just knee-jerk to giving you the bare minimum basics to what they do, because at the end of the day, they're beholden to their shareholders, not you. And they need you to be educated on their tool, not the rest of everything that matters, so that you stay in their ecosystem and continue to churn or turn more and more MRR over to them. So I think that I'm just going to go with a hot take to start. That's not the only reason, but that's a big reason. If you haven't thought through that, you should take a step back and say, am I just following what the vendors are telling me to do, or am I actually like building a holistic security approach to what I'm doing? Reg, am I way off base?
I mean, it's one of the dirty secrets in this industry, I think, is that there's been so much consolidation backed by PE that if you think the big, not even big, colossal players in this industry truly understand what's happening at the SMB level, let's remember why we do cybersecurity is to produce better outcomes for our customers. But if you think these colossal entities really have stayed in touch with how and what small micro businesses really need and how they succeed in cyber, I think you haven't been paying attention, because flipping multiples, and I have nothing against flipping multiples. We have all benefited from VC money, private equity, and so there's nothing wrong with it. But I would agree with Wes that it's a major driver in this industry. And I think the pitch to MSPs from these folks around where opportunity and where growth lies is very one-sided. And that's because it's self-serving, and there's nothing wrong with that. We live in a capitalist society, and I'm a fan of that as well to some degree. But let's recognize that if we are truly assessing and measuring our performance and our value and the way people trust or don't trust us, it comes down to one thing only, and that is outcomes. Like, what are we actually doing? What difference are we making for the people who are paying us to help them? And I would argue that if you think you're going to build a house with hammers then once again, I don't think you've been paying attention. Certainly in cybersecurity, a practice that's easily as much art as it is science, and easily as much people and process and measurements and oversight and governance and many other things as it is technology. So I think I think going back to your question, why do people get religious over this stuff? I think that for me is a pretty simple one. It's like, I think as human beings, we're all programmed. It's in our DNA and our genetics to, you know, migrate to things that we're comfortable with and we feel like we're experts in. So if it sounds like a real technology heavy conversation, then that's probably a technologist having that conversation.
I made the statement recently. I forget who I was talking with at IT Nation, where I said, if you don't show up and tell a vendor what you need, they'll sell you what they have. That doesn't mean it's serving you or your clients any better than any other tool that you could have pulled off the shelf, because you didn't show up and say it needs to be, I'll pull some pedantic examples, multi-tenant SSO integration. It needs to function in this way. My clients are in manufacturing, and so it needs to be able to help me with these other areas like compliance. If you can't show up to a conversation with any technology vendor of yours and provide them that list for them to go through with you and be honest and open about, they're just going to say, like Wes's experience, just click these buttons and your whole world becomes easy. And look, you can do cybersecurity too. It's like, well, how do you know you're doing that at this point? It's a tough question.
It is a tough question. And I can even go back to my old perch days. I'll just say it. I mean, I'm just in that mood today. There are times when you're partnering up with somebody and you're talking to a bunch of end user clients. And I'm like, well, what do you want me to talk about for like a client event? And they're like, well, talk about like security and what's changed, but don't forget, we really want to help them. I want them to buy some more stuff. Right. I'm like, okay, cool. I can do that. And so I would go into these, and I still do these talks today. I'll go in and I'll talk, you don't need to go buy a SIM. You don't need to go buy Fin. But I would say security's changed. You haven't kept up with it. Here's where the risk actually lies. And here's what would happen if you haven't done these things. And here's some examples, real life examples of those that have had this happen to them. Here's some very cost-effective, smart approaches you should take to doing something, but you should do a risk assessment to really find out where you really stand. And that will be a good guidepost to understand what's next, right? I'll tell you though, once you convince a client of that, you can almost sell them anything you want. And that's a little scary. And I'm not saying that there's something nefarious there, but I am saying there's just, which recognize sometimes that's how we do security. Like once we convince them that something matters and they are behind, they should do something, then they're like, well, you're the expert, so you tell me what to do. I just want to ask, are we really the experts? Why are we throwing them this EDR instead of throwing them this security awareness training? Why are we throwing any tool vendor at them when we should be focusing on change management or whatever it may be? Why do we start where we start? Have we ever asked ourselves that question? Because they're leaning on us as the experts if we've done a good job educating them. But it's scary to think sometimes that we're in this position that we can literally sell them anything. And are we a snake oil salesman? Or are we actually giving them what they need?
Do you think organizations like CIS fix that?
For me, I think they do. I think they're how do we say this? It's a guidepost and a blueprint to know that I'm doing the right things. We still struggle with CIS sometimes because where do we start with it? And at what level is acceptable? Is it just IG1 is okay, implementation group 1? Should we be doing more things out of 2? Which ones, right? But yeah, I do think CIS is immensely helpful because it gives us a guidepost.
Yeah, I maybe kind of skirting away from that, but just punctuating it is keep in mind that vendors have a systemic flaw in their approach. And working with companies, whether it's my customers or, other companies that I may have, a vested interest in, and they come to me and they talk about their widget or whatever it is they're trying to sell. And I ask them one question. I say, listen, if you could replace all of your tech with a hamster wheel, but the hamster wheel actually produced better outcomes, would you sell hamster wheels? And if they even hesitate a moment, to me, it's a major indicator that they're intent is misplaced. And think about what's happening in the MSP industry, where it is, I mean, beyond overflowing with shiny objects and tools and gadgets, because they have committed what I consider a mortal sin when it comes to building a business, particularly a services business. And that is, you should not be passionate or religious about your solution. You should be passionate about the problem. Who cares what the solution is? The solution is going to change over time. But right now, we've got an industry that is just chock full of people passionate about their solutions, regardless of the outcomes and regardless of what the problems are. And I would argue, it's when those things become disconnected, we end up with a murky, inefficient system that creates all sorts of problems. Now, on the flip side of that, it creates a lot of opportunity. And I think that's one of the reasons we're here today, because in my opinion, and you may have seen us and you may understand what our approach is, and maybe you don't like it or don't believe in it. But from our perspective, MSPs have massive, almost limitless growth opportunity in cybersecurity, but it's not what the industry is trying to get you to believe. It's completely different.
I love Kyle's comment here. One of his favorite statements on security came from our friend Aaron Chernin. He said, "The internet was built by hippies, but security was built by private equity." It's interesting.
I saw that quote. I've never heard Aaron say that before. I love it. I would also say you can follow that quote and say the problem with the hippies developing the internet is that they couldn't conceive of evil. And so they designed no security into the internet as we know it. So we've been spending eons going back and correcting that.
If you're a real security nerd, you know who, and you probably idolize Bruce Schneier, who is, in my opinion, the greatest cybersecurity thinker of all time. There's a few runners up, and his quote was, "If you think technology is going to solve your security problems, then you don't understand the technology and you don't understand the problems."
That's pretty funny.
It's good. Bruce is a wicked smart guy.
Reg, you brought up something. Vendors having competing incentives, and then you brought up the hamster wheel of progress. I feel like somebody should make a t-shirt about that, by the way. I would wear that t-shirt. How should MSPs navigate this world of self-interested vendors and competing incentives and know that they're actually creating more security, buying the right tools, because tools still need to be involved? How should they navigate any of that?
I think it starts with something that is just woefully missing from the industry, which is critical thinking. When you think about why you started your MSP business and what it is you wanted to achieve and what in the morning and what gets you excited, my guess is there's a lot of stuff in your day right now that doesn't align with all of that. And I think in the pursuit of growth or even survival, which if you agree with most of the statistics out there, 60% of MSPs today are just breaking even or worse. And so obviously we've got some other issues to deal with. But I think if you're going to make a difference in a way that meets your definition of success, you're going to have to think critically about how you get there. And just following blindly some of the industry guidance, and it's not just from vendors, it's from associations and some of the talking heads that have been around for 2 decades that are also antiques, just like managed services. If you are following them blindly and just for rote copying their process and their approach, I think you're missing out, because managed services was invented almost 25 years ago. Some of you may not even be 25 years old right now. It's absolutely an antique, and cybersecurity has really been the straw on that camel. And we are seeing major fissures and fractures and problems with managed services because it doesn't address cybersecurity well, not just pragmatically or technically, like frameworks and things like that, but also in terms of a delivery model. I can tell you that, we've talked with hundreds, maybe thousands of MSPs over our 4 years, and our business model really is not, it doesn't look like an MSP. It's actually very different. But I think to get there, you have to say, okay, this is where I am. This is where people tell me I need to be. Does that sound right? Does that sound right to me? I mean, it's all smart people, but I think we are in such reactive mode, and obviously there's a certain amount of communal lemmingship that goes on here, but you got to ask yourself, like, does this make sense? Like, is this working for me? And I think if you look at the major statistics industry, so 60% at the survival line, and if you believe ConnectWise, 94% of all SMBs are looking for a new MSP because they don't like theirs. They don't feel like theirs is working, and it just goes on and on. Something's broken. The data is there to suggest that a change is necessary in managed services.
So if this is, sorry, go ahead, Wes.
I was just gonna say, can we come back to the word lemmingship? What a great word.
I wanted to put that in quotes here.
That's what happens when you don't have a good word.
Let's not forget, you said communal lemmingship. That'll be the front of the t-shirt, and the back will be the hamster wheel of progress. A Reg Harnish special.
I love it. Sign me up for that shirt.
Sign me up too. We'll get Alex to get us all those shirts. So I feel like this actually introduces our second topic. It's like in a world where this is the environment. This is how lost most, and I'll air quote it for everybody listening and for y'all, security experts think about the problem. Should MSPs, are they the solution to managing cybersecurity for small businesses at all? That's a very open-ended question. So I have no idea where any of you will take this, but I can't wait.
I think they have a major responsibility. And despite, our approach, again, which is very much, let's define the jurisdiction, like what is cybersecurity for MSPs versus everything else. I think, where certainly our customers are very, sometimes hyper focused on the technology aspects of cyber, because that's kind of where we all came from. And small businesses are late to the game. So that kind of maturity in cybersecurity, we just don't see it at this end of the market. So all they understand cybersecurity to be is endpoint protection, encryption, maybe MFA. And so when we talk about opportunity and who should manage, I mean, we're not going to do that. That is a technology. That is a cybersecurity technology that needs management and needs leadership. And how many times we walk into a new customer, a new small and micro business, and see that the basics aren't done. And then I talk to their MSP, and their MSP is off chasing managed SOC and NIST 171 compliance, yet that customer doesn't have MFA enabled or encryption on portable media, or like the very, very basics. And so for me, when we talk about managing, it's like, what are we managing? And for MSPs, there's a pretty good stack of stuff that goes into whether you're a CIS fan or 171 or HIPAA or anything else. But the basics are not getting done. My pitch to every MSP that is willing to listen to me is, go do the stuff that you're really good at. Just do more of it and do it well, because that's not happening. In my experience, my customers are all deficient in their cybersecurity technology. And it could be an outdated firewall. It could be, poorly configured security configurations on an endpoint. It could be, it could be 1,000 things. And if you are an MSP that's, sort of wondering, do I get into HIPAA compliance and risk assessments and incident response and, I'm sorry, Connor, awareness training and cultural and behavioral change and development, it's like you have strayed too far. These are things that are very different than technology. But if you assess and quickly inventory your customers and think about all the greenfield that's available to you, if you just focus on cybersecurity technology, it makes everyone better off, right? Everyone gets to focus on their expertise. Customer gets better outcomes. We're all happy.
But Reg, isn't just buying a tool easier? I mean, I 1,000% agree with you. And that's why the people hear all that and say, nah, that sounds too hard. That sounds too difficult. You're telling me I got to do things. I'd rather just go buy my way out of this problem. The vendor that was over here said, if I buy their tool, then I'm not going to have this breach. Or maybe they didn't say it that aggressively, but they said, if I buy this tool, I'm going to have a reduction. So I just go buy this tool. And now all I am is a order taker. And all I am is just sort of a cybersecurity arms dealer. And I'm not doing anything any good. And here's the reality. Anyone that's been through, you look at any Navy SEAL or Army Ranger, yeah, they're elite. They've done some really cool things, but they all went through boot camp. They all started there. Every single one of them. In security, we've done this thing. We've called it a cybersecurity poverty line. And I wonder if we should sort of add in this idea of a cybersecurity poverty line and a cybersecurity boot camp. Like, you're not qualified, and this is not old man yelling at cloud. Please hear me. But you're not qualified to be going and managing and building security and managing security for a client if you've not gone through the boot camp. The question is, what is the boot camp? And I'd say, to just turn the finger back to myself a little bit, into security like people, we haven't done a very good job of that. Is that getting a bachelor's in cyber? I'm just going to argue no. I'm not saying you shouldn't do it, but I'm not saying that's the poverty line. I'm not saying that's the boot camp. So what's the boot camp? This is the problem that I think we have in security, that we have really caused on our own, because security being this offshoot that came out of, we realized, this whole IT thing, some problems here. We've kind of designed some inefficiencies and insecurities, but we haven't done the right job to say, what's the minimum standard? By the way, this is why cyber insurance is so powerful and effective. I'm not saying their minimum standards are the right things, but I am saying at least somebody came out and put their foot in the ground and said, this is the minimum standards we want to adhere to. Now, I have issues as someone deep in the cyber insurance ballgame. I have a lot of issues with how that's being done, but it's effective because they stuck their foot in the ground and said, this is where we stand. This is the line. And we just haven't done that universally in security at all. And Reg is 1,000% right. It's not about buying things. It's about what are some of the minimal things that we put in place that are process and people-based. That's far more than anything you go and buy. Did you know you can buy Windows out of the box and Azure out of the box, and it comes very insecure? When's the last time you've gone through and you clicked through and done things that cost you $0 under your time that are still really important? Things like conditional access rules, just as a single example. So yeah, I think we do have a problem here. And I wish that we could set a minimum cybersecurity standard and a boot camp, so to speak, for everyone to go through.
Quick question. Do you think that that's the way tools are bought and sold, because that's the way MSPs have learned how to sell them to clients?
This is not an MSP problem. This is a generalist security problem. The same problem exists up market. I can tell you, I've gone to these security conferences and I've run into the dumbest CISOs you've ever run into, that their approach to security. Here's a key, Connor. One thing I'll ask people when I first meet them, if they're like in my security world, I'm like, what does security look like for you? What are you doing? And if you name your security strategy by your vendors, you are immature, right? So things like, hey, Reg, what are you doing for security at your bank? And Reg comes back and like, oh, we're using Cisco Firepower, and we're using Sophos antivirus, and we're using whatever. You're immature. I just know it. You're immature. So yeah, it's a problem that exists everywhere.
I completely agree. This is not an MSP. This is more of a cybersecurity issue. It just so happens that we live in an industry where the vendor ecosystem has experienced just unimaginable consolidation. I mean, unimaginable. If we said 5 years ago that the things that have happened in the last 2 years that were going to happen, everyone would be like, what are you're nuts. That would never, ever happen. And yet it's happened, and it continues to. So that focus on tools is not just sort of a human instinct. It's also being promulgated by these vendors that is really their only growth strategy.
Corey Ames has a great question here. I think it's for you, Reg, when you were mentioning you can't buy your way out of this problem. You have to understand the problem first. He says we need tools like AV, firewall, SAT, EDR. Those tools make cybersecurity possible. Can you elaborate on your statement?
Yeah, first, let me disagree 100% on the need part. So those tools can be amazing. And believe me, I'm a huge fan of cyber tech. There is some amazing, highly capable stuff out there. But you know what it requires? Architecture, strategy, an idea of what risk tolerance looks like at your organization. configuration, tuning, management, monitoring, maintenance, those are all human activities. Again, I mean, it's just a hammer. These things are just hammers. They create massive efficiencies if all of those other things are done. But I'll tell you what, every time I see, particularly this is an enterprise, not so much a small business because not a lot of surface area, but the complexity and surface area at an enterprise organization, the moment they buy a massive security tool, and I'll just use Splunk just because they're not in the room, and they're sort of the punching bag for a lot of good reasons. The moment an organization buys and deploys Splunk, they are immediately twice, maybe 3 times as vulnerable for so many reasons. One, a real false sense of security that Splunk's going to save the day. Two, the complexity of that system distracts everyone else that was doing cybersecurity 2 days ago is now completely overwhelmed with Splunk. So no one's, watching the gauges. And then three, all of that resource, that money that went into Splunk, like it or not, could have been doing other things that, in my opinion, would have been a much greater contribution to risk management, which that's what we do in cyber. We don't do technology. We don't do anything but manage risk. That's it. That's all we do. And if you take that approach, you start to see that, well, most of cybersecurity is really just push-ups. Could I get some fancy ab roller? Yeah, of course. Would it make things easier? Maybe. But it's more expensive. It's one more thing to break. It's, so a lot of cybersecurity really is just hard work. And it comes down to just doing the push-ups.
Yeah, I'll just add 30 seconds to that. I've gone on multiple rants today just because I feel like it. But we're not anti-tool. Like I built and sold a tool called Purge, right? So like, and same for you, Reg. Like, so we love tools, but I think I'm with you, Reg. The tools just go in the belt, and for sure, the tools that my car mechanic have are not only many more varied and far like they do much less. I get by with a wrench, and I can do much more of the wrench than a mechanic does. He's like, I don't use that wrench for only this one purpose. This other tool that costs $400 that I use was one thing. I get it, because that he's in the trade craft of car mechanics. I'm not. So I'm huge tool fans, but I just want to shock everyone a little bit and just make you see that tools are not the beginning of the solution. Tools should be something that comes into my hand at the right time for the right use at the right time. But if we default to tools first and we look at tools primarily as our security solution, we are vastly missing this.
I think that was just Wes subtly hinting to his family that he would like a new wrench set.
No, you do not want to cars. There's all sorts of manners of words that come out of my mouth that nope.
You'll come back. In fact,
that's why I have so few tools. I'm like, honey, I can't do that. I don't have that tool. We should take it in.
My dad does that as well. Planned ignorance. And I caught on to it when I was like 16 years old. It's like, just because you tell me you can't do this is no longer an excuse. You're more than capable. You're smarter than I am. You get out there, you go do it.
Yeah. Last thing I want to say on this, Connor, is the original question I wanted to make sure I was really clear on. Should MSPs be managing cybersecurity? Yes. If you don't, someone else is. It might be chaos. It might be a bad guy. It may be your competitor. But yes, you should be managing their security. Now, the way that you do it and how you do it is up to a lot of different questions. There are universal things that you put in place every single time. Let me make an analogy. If I am a knee doctor and someone comes in and I've never talked to them before and I don't have any record of them, I do not just break out the bone saw. I want to ask a bunch of questions. And it doesn't matter if this person comes in who's totally different than that patient that comes in. I'm going to ask a uniform set of questions. I'm probably going to do a uniform set of analysis. I'm probably going to x-ray or whatever it is, all of them. I'm doing a normal set of things to make sure I'm not negligent, to make sure I'm not making mistakes, to make sure that you're not forgetting to tell me something so we don't miss something. But then the treatment plan that comes in is totally different from someone that tore their ACL from someone that just bruised their kneecap, right? There's a big difference between the two. And I design security differently for those people. To bring this back home for MSPs, same thing for your clients. What you might be doing for a bank could be very, very difficult different than you're doing for, let's say, a law firm or a CPA. I'm not saying that security is less important or more important for one or the other, but there may be regulatory differences that come in play. There may be budget expectations and differences that come in play. There's a lot of things that happen there, right? But you must be managing this, because if you're not, somebody else is.
You know, one of the analogies that I really liked that you brought up in a talk that we actually gave at IT Nation was that of a tailor. Is your tailor doesn't, well, some do, but most tailors, they don't go create a suit from scratch in the back and then come out after measuring you and give it to you. They go back to a suit that's mostly all put together and everything is mostly all there, and then they stitch it up just a tiny bit based upon you need a 42 short or whatever. I really like that approach, because it's not necessarily that you're recreating the wheel, but it is that everybody's needs are different. And if you don't account for that, then every problem becomes a nail and all you have is a hammer. I do like Kyle's comment here too. A vendor booth that's just about, honestly, it sounds like therapy. Please tell us. Yeah, like let's ask all of these. Here are 8 questions and it's all about the basics. Do you do any of these? And then would be really funny, Kyle, is if they then started asking all of the other questions. It's like, well, what if we did all of these other super complex cybersecurity things instead? It's like, oh, somebody can walk into your front door and plug a USB into your routers. So no, I don't think any of that really matters. That'd be, I'd want to sit there as a fly on the wall. So if we've answered this question, MSPs should. They have to in some capacity, whether that's partner with people. It's very clear whether it's partner with people or do it in-house. You're gaining the expertise. You're either hiring it or you're working with the expertise. What are some steps that MSPs should begin taking to answer that how question? How should they begin doing it? How should they begin thinking about it? And feel free, Reg or Wes, to take this.
I think the first is being comfortable taking or making the leap between a symmetrical binary practice to something that is completely subjective, gray, and asymmetric. Because with technology, almost without exception, if you need something, you buy it and then you have it, whether it's a Microsoft license or more storage or a laptop. With security, you can spend a lot more money and actually be less secure. Or you can do nothing and be more secure. I think certainly one of the things that we face in our prospecting with small and micro businesses is that they believe they're invulnerable. And I have no data really to refute that, because they say, well, we've been in business for 40 years and we've never been jacked. Explain that, Mr. Security Guy. And I have no explanation for that. You rolled the dice and things have worked out in your favor. Awesome. The fact that you haven't spent $1 on cybersecurity, good for you. So likelihood is complete voodoo. I mean, if you're comfortable getting into a situation and operationally where nothing lines up the way you have always expected it to go, and the way it's always gone, where there's just a one-to-one corollary between your investment and your return. Cybersecurity is nothing like that. The other problem is what I referred to as symmetry, which is in technology, there's no real empirical evidence necessarily, but generally speaking, $1 problem requires $1 worth of solution. In cybersecurity, it's very, very different. Offense is way, way easier than defense. So what we see is asymmetry produces this situation where you have $1 worth of problem, it's going to take $10 worth of solution, because there's a lot of permutations, a lot of variables. And you can't, it's not feasible financially or economically in any way to try and manage risk by throwing money at a problem. You've got to be smarter about it. And to do smarter things, you have to understand risk. And risk, I've been doing risk for 22 years. And I still feel I think of better ways to kind of calculate, envision, treat it. I'm still coming up with better ways because I love learning from, about these things. I feel like, risk management is just shy of magic in some ways. It's very, very difficult and requires experience, in my opinion. Maybe that's because, my brain is different than everyone else's. But I think the first step is deciding, how comfortable you can be in and adopting a completely different, might as well be making pizza practice to your MSP. And then go from there. If that still makes sense to you, or if there's passion there, or that kind of problem solving sounds awesome, and it gets you moving, then I think you're maybe in a good spot. Then you got to deal with the economic issues, which I'll let someone else talk about.
The economic issues. It is the defender's dilemma. You got to be right all the time. An attacker has to be right exactly once.
Yeah, but here's the thing about that paradigm. There is a flip to it. What I mean by that is we can have a defeatist mentality of, oh, they only have to be right once. They're working in countries that look the other way. As long as the money flows into them, they can try and try and try. There's no inhibitions. That flips, though, the second they're in our network. Ryan Weeks and I did a talk on this a while back, and he said, we were talking about this idea of once they're in our network, they now have to be right every single time. If I have good detections and I have the ability to see and I have maturity in place, and I have multiple layers of security that I've deployed, now that paradigm flips. All I need is one sign that something weird happened, and then I can go take action before a huge right of boom event happens, right? And that's something that we actually just don't take advantage of, because most of our maturity is left of boom and it's weak. That in itself is pretty weak. And then when we start to go to right of boom activities, meaning like detection controls, response and recovery controls, we have very little in place. And so unfortunately, I should say the paradigm should shift, but it doesn't shift as much because we don't really have good insights into what's happening in our own home turf. So just wanted to say that because I've thought about that often.
Who was it we were talking to when we asked a room of they asked a room of MSPs if they had gone through their an IR tabletop exercise within the last 3 years, and it was an appallingly low amount of people in the room that actually had.
Yeah. And, that's starting to change, but I wonder if it's just confirmation bias because of the events that I go to. So now we do these. And how many of you have done a workshop event? So Matt Lee just did one with Ethan Tancredi from Huntress, did a banger job of a really cool sort of like gamified tabletop test. And then they worked through their own incident response plans from there. And it was awesome. And we asked the same question. A bunch of hands went up of, yeah, we've worked through it. We've written one. We've tested it, the majority. But I'm like, yeah, but we're also at a security conference. I think that doesn't represent the rest of us. So yeah, I still think it's a problem is my point. So yeah. Connor, can I show something? I don't know who is going to share it out. I can share it, or maybe Jamie is going to. But one thing that I wanted to share that I thought would be helpful, and we'll send this out to anyone watching, so you're welcome to screenshot it, but we'll give you a copy of it later, is this MSP cybersecurity maturity stage. Let me share my screen out, and I'm going to show this to you guys. Because one thing, let me say, before I share it, it's not perfect. It's not hard science. It's a guidepost of where I think most MSPs are according to their revenue level. And one of the things that, and Reg, I want you to expand on this in a minute, MSPs that are running at $1 million EBITDA should not be doing the things that are someone that's 5 million EBITDA. The ones that even aren't anywhere close to $1 million EBITDA probably are not going to do the same things that someone that's running at $1 million would be doing, right? And so my point is, there's differences at your revenue levels of what you can realistically do. And as we started this call, we did some pre-banter. You can actually do yourself damage if you start trying to do things that are above your pay grade, right? What do the people say? It's like above your britches or whatever. There's like an old person saying around that. We can really run ourselves into trouble because now, going back to Reg's example of Splunk, darn it, we're going to put a full-fledged enterprise SIM in place, and we're going to roll in all this data from all our different clients. We're going to build out a SOC with our one guy who's a help desk tier 3, and he's going to be managing it, right? Like, and now we just really ruined ourselves because we're not doing what the client needs. We're not delivering what they need, and we're not even developing a tool stack that makes sense for them, right? Why would we have, an armed, police officer guarding the front door of my house all day long, 24/7? It makes no sense. There's not enough policemen to go around to do that, right? So it's the same kind of example, right? So let me share this out. And I want to talk about this a little bit. Again, it's not perfect, but Kyle Christensen, my co-founder, and I built this a while back, and we've shared this a few different times. And what this says is it kind of walks you through some of the major revenue milestones. So these are not EBITDA, this is sort of revenue. But just looking at kind of where MSPs typically fall, just generally speaking. And so you kind of start, I'm not going to go through every single one of these, but you start at that 1 million time a frame, like up to 1 million. We call this the owner hustle. Usually the owner is the one that's doing everything. They're still responsible for pretty much all sales, usually 5 employees or less. Their tool stack is not very immature, or is very immature. Their biggest thing is, how do I just get growth? Like I'm in growth mode. I'll take any business, anyone that's interested. I'll work with anybody. I'll compromise in some cases, I might compromise my seat price. I've just got to grow, but they can pivot quickly. The ICP is ideal customer profile. So it's pretty bare bones. Like anyone fits. if you have money, you can pay me, you're in my ICP. And then we start to grow out of that. We get to this 2 million stage, owner reinforcements. And now we start to see some defining processes. Our ICP begins to start getting defined. We might have a full-time service manager that comes in. We're starting to get into security frameworks. And what I want to share with this as you step through all of this is, if you're a younger, smaller MSP, there's just things that you cannot be doing that are far more shifted to the right. And Reg, you and I have this talk all the time, and I'd love for you to share about this more. I think MSPs feel like, and Nelson, yes, you absolutely can have it. We'll make sure that we send this out to everyone that's joined. But Reg, can you talk about this a little bit? Because I think a lot of times MSPs, they're smaller, feel guilty that they can't do some of the things they hear the big boys at the big conferences are doing, and they don't actually have to. There's a lot of things they shouldn't be doing that they think they should. Can you kind of expound on that a little bit more?
Well, I think 2 things. One is more maybe a clarification for me, because I love this chart. I think it's a great way to even oversimplify a maturity approach or scale. But I think keep in mind that even a $10 million MSP can be just breaking even and be zero EBITDA. So it really depends on what your vision is, your financials look like, what your team looks like, what are your customers asking for. But arguably, at any one of these levels, there's massive opportunity. I think for us, we would love to see MSPs triple down on encryption and multi-factor and Intune and all the things that you guys are really good at, because it makes our lives easier on the cybersecurity side. But I think this kind of progression is something that I think we need to really circulate, because I don't think there's a lot of guidance out there that's comparable to this in terms of, well, here's where I am in terms of my growth path, and what should, do I look like my peers? Am I a unicorn? What's happening here? And I think in terms of, adding cybersecurity, again, there's 2 pieces here. And I know that a lot of folks out there were here to talk about how do they add managed, SOC or incident response to their line card. But I think there's massive opportunity in just doing the things that you're probably already doing that are even more necessary at times. I would also argue that the maturity is maybe a misleading term, just because if you've been able to stumble your way to 3 million, it doesn't make you a mature organization. And so I would say, as you go through this process of self-assessment and understanding what does your vision look like, and strategically, how are you getting there, maturity is going to be, it's going to be paramount that you understand what are you capable of doing, right? And how do I get from 2 to 3, 3 to 10, 10 to 100? What do those steps actually look like before you make any decisions? Again, going back to my initial comment about thinking critically about everything that you see, I think this is a good example of, a standardized, yes, not perfect, but standardized progression that gives you some mile markers in terms of where should I generally be, or what should I generally be thinking about at any one of these stages.
Yeah, really well said. And I want to lead with an encouragement on all that to folks. If you see, you're like, well, man, I'm not even at 2 million yet. That doesn't matter. that doesn't mean that you can't compete with a 3 or 25 or $100 million MSP. You might actually be far more, to Reg's point, mature than them in your processes. You're still in a growth mode. Now, maybe you have some things you're working through and some efficiencies that you can go fix and some scale you need to be focusing on. But yeah, it's very well said. Never feel like, well, because I'm a smaller MSP, I'm not as good, or I don't have the sophistication, or I actually lack the maturity. You actually might. One of the reasons some of these bigger, like heavy growth PE funded MSPs love to swallow up MSPs is they're looking for ones that honestly are more mature than their portfolio is. And they're hoping they can grow from there, which is a topic for another day. But I also think too, when you're thinking about all of this, also understand there is this idea of concentration risk, where I do see MSPs get themselves in trouble as they walk up and they're a sub $1 million MSP, and they go and they take on a contract that's going to pay $25K a month, and it's the vast majority of their revenue. And they're like, oh man, now that we got this, like, look how much we can do now, all this revenue coming in. And then unfortunately, you sort of tune your MSP to that revenue level. You've got some bloat, you've got some immaturity that exists. Or this could happen at a $10 million MSP, and you take on that, $250,000 a year contract, whatever it is. And then all of a sudden you have bad service delivery. Outcomes aren't great because you bit off more than you can chew, to use an elephant analogy. And now the customer walks away from you after a year, and you got huge concentration risk, and you are in a huge hurt. Now you're looking at layoffs, et cetera. So my point is, it works on both sides of this funnel. You have to be careful not to bite off more than you can chew, but also don't be intimidated by others that may be above you or even below you. It doesn't mean that they're more mature. And Connor, I'm going to flip a question to you, if I can play the moderator host for a second. You talk to a whole bunch of MSPs at a whole bunch of different revenue levels. What do you see as differentiators between them? Do you notice anything that stands out to you as something that is a big difference between a much bigger MSP or a very smaller one when it comes to a stage growth like this?
I'll say there are two things. One, if you sell, you don't sell all of your services a la carte. You have an offering that you tailor to your clients. Not only can you introduce tools to provide outcomes to your clients without having to renegotiate all of the contracts, but you have just a lot more latitude for you as the expert to make decisions for your clients. The second is any MSP that shows up to a sales call or a conversation and tells me, here's the set of things I'm hoping you can help me with. Let's have a conversation centered around those. That's an identifier of somebody who is, mature in their buying process, which means they're focusing on trying to find an outcome for their clients, not finding a tool to sell for more margin. So they come to us and they say, I need you to do these 12 things because that's what my clients need. All of a sudden, they're selling the outcome. They're not selling what the vendor had. One thing I would like to point out that I think is really cool about this is if you notice the progression of ICP in the bottom half of these white boxes here, essentially this chart is you are getting better and better and better as an MSP at serving a smaller and smaller and smaller, like, relative segment of a market. What that means is you can answer the question, why are you the best in the world at doing this specific thing for this specific set of clients? And if you can't answer that reasonably well, that's when clients have reasons to, 94% of them want to find another MSP. I guarantee the 6% that don't want to find another MSP, they're either not talking with their MSP enough, or they're not convinced that they're an expert. It's probably a lot of the latter. And so I really like that recommendation. Find something you want to be good at.
One other thing I'd mention is that a revenue level is not a vision statement. It does not describe who you want to be, how you want to get there, what your core values are. And so I think, again, a lot of this soul searching comes from this idea that just because you can do something doesn't mean you should do something. And so there's a lot of other factors and variables that go into whether or not you are a cyber-focused MSP, meaning you really do focus on all those technical aspects of cybersecurity. But I don't think there's any chart out there for an MSP who dabbles in cybersecurity, maybe makes a couple of mistakes and pays for it, or one that maybe they haven't made any massive mistakes, but they're also not making any money. There's no real good charts for that. And I would say, I don't have, again, good data on this, but a big percentage of the MSPs who end up working and partnering with us, they dabbled in cybersecurity. And I can't think of any that really paid for it like significantly, but they did figure out after a certain amount of time that I can't do this anymore. I got to figure out, how do I handle my customers' cybersecurity requests, and how can I remain a good provider and a trusted asset to these folks without attempting a HIPAA risk assessment, or without attempting to build an incident response plan, or the other 1,000 things that are out there. So I think this is like layer one of the maturity process. I think what's up to us now is to figure out, how do we take this antique we call managed services and start building new layers that help us preserve some of the unbelievably, incredibly powerful things that are built into the MSS model, but starting to replace gradually or evolve certain things that are just broken right now. And a big part of this, because I spend my entire day in cybersecurity, is how do cybersecurity and technology work together? What's the jurisdiction between a cybersecurity provider and an IT provider, and how do they work together? I think we would be much more productive if we thought about the problem in that way, rather than just focusing on, how do I get to the next revenue level? Because you can improve your business without adding revenue at all. And there are businesses out there, I happen to run one today, that we refuse to get to another revenue level until we're spinning off a certain percentage of EBITDA every month. It's just one of our, I'll call it a restricting KPIs, which is, we will not hire, we will not do X, we will not do Y until we're consistently at a certain profitability level every month. And that's just who we are, because we've all been through hyper growth organizations, and it's awesome the first time, it's less awesome the second time, and it's not awesome the third time. And just trust me on that. So you got to figure out, like, what kind of company do you want to be, and truly, what is the vision? I mean, the vision and your values, that should be driving the organization, not a revenue level, and certainly not what some colossal PE driven megalith is pushing down your throat.
You have to decide what you want to be before somebody else tells you what that is.
Yeah, don't let someone else tell you how to do this, including us. Like, I'm sure there's another way to do this. Like, we're an option, which is, I would say, parallel, but completely different to the way the industry wants you to sell cybersecurity today and what they want you to do. But we can't be the only option. It's just the universe is too disparate. There's just too many permutations. So critically think about, what it is you want to do and how you want to get there. And I think that will answer a lot of these questions. But don't believe me. Don't listen to me. Don't listen to Kaseya either. Find your own path, like, figure this out. The data's there.
I know we're over time, but Wes, did you want to say some parting words before we head on out of here?
No, just thanks for the discussion. Thanks for letting us rant a little bit. This is a big problem that needs to be solved. Hopefully we gave you a few more solutions than we did just talking about the problems. I hope so. But definitely give me a follow. Just search me up at LinkedIn, just Wes Spencer. Check out what we're doing at empathmsp.com. That's all I got.
Awesome. Thanks everyone for watching. Reg, Wes, thanks for being here. We will be sending that infographic that Wes was wonderful enough to provide us with to you, so you can take a look at that. And I am very certain that if you had any questions on it, Wes would love to connect with you and go through them. So don't hesitate.
It's version 1. Yep.
Version 1. We already found a typo. So look, we're iterating. Exactly. We're iterating live. Yeah. But thanks everyone for joining. It was a blast chatting with you too, and
thank you for the time, guys. Okay, bye-bye.